Hey guys, coming at you from across the table. This is Greta Zeffo. I wanted to talk to you about a book I just finished reading called Creating Innovators by Tony Wagner. But just before I get into that, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background where I'm coming from. So I am not even entirely sure which concepts have really changed my teaching, which ones came from the book and which ones I've been sort of chewing on for a couple of years. You see, some of the administrators in my school, namely Steve Bowman, Tawana Rusk, Allison Wilbur, have been working with a team the past 2 years that they call the positive deviance, and I prefer to call us the divergence, a name initially thrown out in jest, but really it kind of speaks to who we are. I guess a voluntary group of teachers willing to take risk, willing to fail, willing to try some new things in the classroom. So honestly, these are not brand new concepts for me. This is stuff that we've been talking about for a while, enough so that I recognize the buzzwords in the books that I'm reading currently, and I am getting really excited about the direction that my teaching is headed. So I won't give entire credit to Creating Innovators, the book, but I do think it's an enhancement to kind of the direction I've already been heading. So that said, I'll get into a little review of the book. There are definitely some positive attributes, and I would highly recommend this book for any educators who are looking to transition out of the traditional educational model that we all grew up with, which was, compliance to listening to lectures, taking notes, memorization, regurgitating on a test, and that sort of thing. As we think about this new generation and the way their brains are developing and what our new global society even looks like, I think we have to evaluate shifts in education. For me, I've said this to friends before, but I sort of felt like I came to the point in my career a few years ago that it was either it's time for me to retire or I have to ditch this old model and try some new things. And it has been a slow work in progress. I have not arrived. Even as I contemplate next year, I can't quite wrap my head around what it looks like. So for now, I start with some subtle changes. I overhaul certain units, and then I could see over the next year or two it just really developing into something vastly different from what it used to be. Now, I am not at all, and nor does the book suggest that we totally ditch the old method of doing things, because there are some tremendous powers in that. It's tried and true, but I think that those of us who are going to stay in the profession without burnout and who are going to be most relevant to our students' needs have to have these conversations and think about how we would like to see a shift in education. Even some of my thought patterns have been influenced by an architect that the educators and families of our school are working with as we begin building a new innovation center on campus. So I'm thinking about lots of things like, how can I make the classroom more student-centered? How can I create creative, critically thinking, innovative entrepreneurs in my classroom? So the book Creating Innovators definitely asks those questions, but it also, I think, it's a little more philosophical than it is practical. But I like that the audience is wide. The persons that should read this book, yes, as I said, educators, but also surprisingly parents. I was really surprised by how many of the pointers and tips and philosophies were geared specifically toward parents. Now, those of you with grown kids, I might steer you slightly away from it because you may walk away like, why didn't I do that? But maybe not. For me, it was a little bit affirming in ways, and then there were ways that I was sort of slapping my paw, wishing I had done things a little bit differently. And many times I would close the book and immediately try to engage my own children in something, thinking it's not too late, I can still get them to do this or that. And so there has even been a shift a little bit in my parenting philosophies, not major, because I think I already... I think I do things that encourage creativity in my household, although there were definitely some things I could look back and see that I could have done better, or should have done, or should have tried, or should have limited, but no point in beating myself up. You can only just pick up the straps where you are and plunge forward. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I loved that it was for parents. I loved that it was for educators. I loved that there is a letter to innovators at the back. I refused to annotate those pages because I think I'm going to use a Hue document camera that I'm getting for my classroom next year to show it to students. I don't know when exactly in my curriculum. I don't know if I want to do it at the beginning of the year, mid-year, end of year, but I definitely want to share it with them. I can think of a few even alumni of our school that I just want to send this to, just as a little bit of encouragement. I will acknowledge that the absolute best thing about the book is that it was mentally stimulating. It did force me to think and reflect and dream, and there are margin notations all throughout. I mean, I wrote all over this book, and in the spaces toward the back where there's a good bit of margin, I mean, dozens of ideas. But what I'm proud of is that the book doesn't offer practical ideas for me to use in my classroom as much as it is a change in mindset. And so those dozens of ideas were original creations inspired by the book, which I really love, because then I'm not duplicating necessarily what's already been done. It has me thinking. And in fact, some of my ideas have been done in other classrooms, but I've never tried them in mine, never thought to try them in mine. But to me, they're organic, authentic, and new. So I'm looking forward to trying some things in my classroom. I have started working with some of my team, my English department, to hash out some of these ideas, to brainstorm, to put some pants on this massive ideas, how to structure it, how to organize it, and have tried to work toward an overarching theme so that, I could get lost in tiny little things that I could plug into the daily activities, but then I think I would be defeating the point. That would be moving my students toward engagement, but not empowerment. In a nutshell, the book is really driving home the idea of students as owners of their learning process, and to really tap into that, we have to help them identify their passions. When we give students the opportunity to research and play in their passions, they really become not as much engaged as empowered to do something with purpose. I think the book well defined the millennial generation and how we can help reach them. And while I think some teachers would argue, I've been doing this for years and years and years, some of the activities, yes, but the mindset behind it, it's a little bit different than what we've talked about before, mostly because we are dealing with a whole new breed of learners. This book considers that all individuals must be innovators, and that I think is what took me a little while to latch on to. I would have said, probably without thinking over it too much, that innovation mostly happens in the fields of technology or the STEM or STEAM fields of school. And I wasn't really contemplating that in all careers, to be successful, we have to be innovators. And as much as we talk about We are preparing students for jobs that don't currently exist. Have we really contemplated that this generation will be the generation to create those jobs? So are we all creators and innovators? Probably. And we as Christians know that because we're made in the image of God. So yes, there's new things to it. Some of it is a packaging, but some of it is truly a mindset. It's hard for me to remove myself from the stage of the classroom because I consider myself the professional, the master of the content. I don't usually use much of a textbook because it's in my head. And in the past, I think my philosophy has always been, if the kids could graduate knowing as much as I do, then they're in good shape moving forward, because they would have a good content knowledge of British literature for the purpose of cultural sophistication. They would have some skills to write not just accurately but with style. They would be developing an enhanced vocabulary. They would become close readers, and that's what I wish for them. And while those are not bad ideas, and I do absolutely stay committed to those things, this classroom cannot be as much about me demonstrating what I know and making mini-me's in the process. What we need to be doing is teaching students how to be learners for life. Not just that they can duplicate what some other model has done before them, but so that they can go out and do brand new things. So I know it's so complex and nuanced. All I know how to do is simplify it. And plus, as I said, it's a long book, and it's ideas I've been working on with my colleagues for a couple of years now. So I would say read the whole thing, although I could probably reduce it to a 30-minute lecture. Read the whole thing because it gives it time to sort of sink in. And it's not a book that I started in a day and finished 3 or 4 days later. It's a book that you chew on. It's a book that you read a couple of pages and then stop and brainstorm ideas at the back of the book. And then you return to it a couple of days later. It's really a chew and digest book, to use a quote from Francis Bacon that I love. So all that said, I do give it my endorsement. I would recommend it for colleagues, but with nearly every book, there's some things that you take and some things that you toss. What I didn't like about probably was it tended to drive home the points a little bit too much. It went into a little bit too much detail about some of the, let's say, student entrepreneurs or young innovators fresh in the work field. It went a little bit too much into their biographies. I like knowing what influenced them, but sometimes it just went a little bit too deep into those areas. So I found myself wanting to skim read parts, but I really don't like to skim read because then I don't feel like I've wholly digested the book. So I did read just about word for word. I think it would be safe to say you can skim some parts, but had I skipped the whole section on sort of businessy, STEAM, entrepreneurship, sort of things that I thought at first would be irrelevant to an English teacher, I would have missed some golden nuggets. So I'm glad that I did go through page by page looking for what was meaningful and influential to me. That said, one of the other problems of the book is it is highly STEM-centric. It talks so much about problem solving, and sometimes I wonder, what is problem solving in the English classroom? Obviously, we can edit the errors in grammar, but I don't know how much we can tackle a big project in terms of solving a problem. But I think where I'm headed is students researching things that are exciting to them, that are profoundly important to them, and they have a little more fun in the process. And that's sort of the stepping off point, and from there it gets into tiny little nuanced ways that that we work through some really empowering opportunities in the classroom. Another interesting thing about the book, I don't know if I want to call it a negative or not, is there's this reference to videos on the website, and I'll just be honest, I have not gone to the videos. To read the book in print copy seems like a distraction. I don't want to stop reading my print copy, put it down, go to a computer, and plug in this website. I'm not sure if it's going to be totally redundant or new information. I think it's largely made up of interviews, best I can tell. I might go back and look at some of the ones that may be a little more, I'd like to see it demonstrated in the classroom. So I may peruse and see if any of it is applicable to that. It would make more sense if I were reading a Kindle version of this and could just go to links directly. That might be fun and might give a break from sometimes laborious reading, but the language of it is not very scientific. It's not a hard read. And honestly, I keep saying long, but it's really not that long. Let's see, I have it in front of me. I mean, a little under 300 pages. It's just wordy. And I'll tell you in my next book review how it's so vastly different from the book Empower that I'm reading right now. I would finally say what I didn't like about it is that it sort of swings the pendulum to the far extreme, where the old way of doing education is almost laughable, but it puts just 3 educational organizations up on this pedestal to say they're the ones doing it right and everyone else is messing up. And I just want to say, sir, you haven't been to Kennesaw, Georgia. You haven't seen what we're doing at Mount Perrin Christian School. You don't know about our plans for the Murray Innovation Center. So in ways, it was a little bit backhanded. At times, it was a hard pill to swallow, but not so much because it spoke truth that I didn't want to hear. It was because it was a little bit rude and presumptuous. In my estimation, Mr. Wagner thinks that he has met and seen all of the good, and with few exceptions, he may think, he didn't come out and say this, but he may think that those who can't do teach, that old cliche, just because toward the end it sort of goes on a rant about the lack of rigorous education for teachers and a definite lack of accountability and professional growth. And that's where I highly disagree. And I guess it's the environment that you're in, maybe because I'm in the private system rather than the public. Maybe it's because of my particular bosses, but I firmly believe that there are many of us on the right track. And also, Mr. Wagner has not been to a Keeping the Wonder workshop where the English teachers there are driving a major move in English education. In fact, Wagner hardly mentions English at all, though I dare say no one in any career could be successful without the ability to read complex text and communicate clearly and effectively, both orally and written. So, even though some of what he said was offensive, I know it wasn't directed toward me or my school, and just maybe a more naive perspective than he thinks, because I think a lot of people out there are doing great things, and that's the whole point in collaboration. Look at Instagram for teacher innovators who are breaking the trends and the molds of what have been done before, and it's really an exciting time to be a teacher. So that's it. That's my little review of Creating Innovators. I do hope you'll read it. Take the good, toss the bad. You'll be a better person for it.